Behave: The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst, by Robert M. Sapolsky. Picture this. You've just broken into Adolf Hitler's bunker. Guards are down. You kick through that final door, weapon drawn. He scrambles for his pistol. You're quicker. Knocks it away. He lunges for the cyanide capsule. You slap that aside, too. He's cornered. You've actually captured the most notorious monster in human history. Now here's where it gets interesting. What would you actually do to him? What punishment could possibly fit his crimes? Neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky admits he's been having this exact fantasy since childhood. Just thinking about it gets his heart racing. His mind conjures the most elaborate, excruciating tortures imaginable, keeping Hitler alive but paralyzed, able to feel every sensation, suffering for eternity. But then reality crashes in. As a scientist, Sapolsky doesn't believe in evil as some mystical force. He doesn't believe in souls. He doesn't even think punishment serves a real purpose in our justice system. And yet, that feeling persists, that primal, gut-level craving for revenge. This tension sits at the very heart of his extraordinary book, Behave. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies and earned praise as a modern masterpiece. And for good reason. It tackles humanity's most bewildering paradox. Why do we act the way we do? How can the same species that rushes into burning buildings to save strangers also orchestrate genocides? We're the primates who invented empathy and the primates who perfected warfare. How do both realities coexist in us? Robert Sapolsky, Stanford professor of biology and neurology, MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, has devoted his life to unraveling this mystery. He's equal parts neurobiologist, studying the intricate circuitry of our brains, and primatologist, spending summers among wild baboons in Africa. This dual perspective gives him a unique lens into the biological currents steering our behavior. Today, I'm taking you on a journey through his most striking insights. By the end, you'll understand the invisible forces shaping your choices, from hormones flooding your system to the culture you absorbed growing up, all the way back to our species' evolutionary origins. We're going to peel away the layers of human behavior, one by one, revealing why we do what we do at our absolute best and our absolute worst. This isn't just a recap, it's a roadmap to understanding yourself and the intricate, beautiful, sometimes terrifying landscape of human nature. Let's start with a single behavior. Any behavior. You pull a trigger. You reach out to comfort someone in pain. You lie to spare someone's feelings. You betray a friend's trust. One action, happening in 1 second. Sapolsky poses a deceptively simple question. Why did that just happen? To find the answer, he suggests we work backward through time. We'll start 1 second before the behavior, then zoom out progressively, minutes, hours, years, centuries, until we're examining millions of years of evolution. Think of yourself as a detective at a crime scene, except the mystery you're solving is human action itself. Let's dive in. 1 second before. 1 second before you acted, what was happening? Everything boils down to the brain. Your neurons fired. Electrical signals zipped along pathways, commanding your muscles to move. The brain serves as the final common pathway, where every influence we're about to explore converges into a single action. To make sense of this staggeringly complex organ, Sapolsky uses a simplified 3-layer framework. Imagine an ancient reptilian brain at the core. Layer 1. This is your brainstem, handling all the automatic functions. Breathing, heart rate, body temperature. It's your brain's engine room, humming away in the background. Wrapped around that is Layer 2, the limbic system, the seat of emotions. Fear, aggression, pleasure, desire. They all originate here. This is what makes your heart pound during a horror movie. even though you know it's fiction. The limbic system processes your world and generates your emotional response. At its center sits a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. The amygdala functions as your brain's alarm system, constantly scanning for danger. Here's the key insight. This structure is central to both fear and aggression. They're deeply, biologically intertwined. A threat appears, the amygdala activates, and you prep for fight or flight. It's what makes a cornered animal attack. Sapolsky recounts the chilling case of Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower sniper. In 1966, this seemingly ordinary engineering student and Eagle Scout climbed a university tower and opened fire, killing 16 people after murdering his wife and mother. His suicide note requested a brain autopsy, noting he couldn't comprehend his own violent urges. The autopsy revealed a tumor pressing directly on his amygdala. His brain's fear and aggression circuit was being hijacked. This doesn't mean the tumor alone caused his rampage. He'd also endured abuse from his father. Biology is never that straightforward. But it demonstrates how a malfunctioning amygdala can amplify pre-existing tendencies. It's your panic button. Finally, layered on top is layer 3, the neocortex. This newest, most evolved brain region is enormous in humans. This is where rational thought, planning, and self-control live. It's the part that thinks, reasons, and makes conscious choices. The most crucial section is the frontal cortex, sitting right behind your forehead. The frontal cortex acts as your brain's executive. Sapolsky's elegant definition of its function: the frontal cortex makes you do the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. It's the voice saying, skip that second slice of cake, or study instead of streaming another episode, or don't send that angry text. It reins in the impulsive, emotional demands from the limbic system. Consider Phineas Gage, the 19th century railroad worker who survived an iron rod blasting through his frontal cortex. He lived, but his personality transformed completely. The formerly responsible, well-liked man became impulsive, profane, and unreliable. His friends said he was no longer Gage. His brain's executive had been eliminated, and the emotional, impulsive parts now ran the operation. So in that 1 second before any behavior, there's a constant dialogue, sometimes a battle, between the emotional, reactive limbic system, especially the amygdala, and the thoughtful, rational frontal cortex. But there's a third player, the dopamine system. You've probably heard dopamine called the pleasure chemical. Sapolsky reveals it's far more fascinating than that. Dopamine isn't really about the pleasure of receiving a reward. It's about anticipating it. It's the thrill of pursuit, not the satisfaction of achievement. It's what you feel when you're about to accomplish something, the motivation driving you toward a goal. Here's where it gets interesting. Dopamine release skyrockets with uncertainty. A guaranteed reward is pleasant, but a maybe reward, one that arrives only 50% of the time, that might happen, sends dopamine levels soaring. This is the neurological engine powering gambling addictions and our compulsion to check phones for notifications. The pleasure lives in the possibility. So in that final second, your brain is orchestrating chaos. The amygdala screams about potential threats. The frontal cortex attempts rational, long-term decision-making. And the dopamine system whispers about the delicious anticipation of possible rewards. The behavior you produce is whichever voice wins that internal negotiation. Seconds to minutes before. But what triggered that whole brain conversation initially? For that, we zoom out to the seconds and minutes preceding the act. This is where sensory cues enter. The sights, sounds, and smells your brain was processing. Much of this happens below conscious awareness. Scientists call these subliminal primes. Sapolsky highlights some deeply disturbing research. Put a white person in a brain scanner and flash a black face for just a fraction of a second, too brief to consciously register. What happens? The amygdala, that fear and aggression center, activates. The brain automatically categorizes us versus them with frightening speed. Now, show the face longer, and something else occurs. Initially, the amygdala fires, but then the frontal cortex intervenes and calms it down. The brain's executive stepping in to say, "Hold on, let's actually think about this. Let's not leap to prejudiced conclusions." But that initial gut reaction exists, a remnant of our tribal evolutionary heritage. This automatic bias has tragic real-world consequences. Sapolsky references the shooting of Amadou Diallo, an unarmed West African immigrant shot 41 times by New York police. He was reaching for his wallet, but in a split second, the officer's brains processed "black man reaching for something" as threat and perceived a gun where none existed. Their amygdalas reacted faster than their frontal cortices could intervene. It's not just race. We're primed by everything. Hold a warm coffee cup, and you're more likely to judge strangers as having warm personalities. Sit in a hard chair, and you become a harder negotiator. A foul smell in the room makes you render harsher moral judgments. Our brains struggle separating literal sensations from metaphorical concepts. An immoral act feels literally dirty, which is why one study found people recalling unethical behavior they'd committed were more likely to choose antiseptic wipes over pencils as gifts afterward. It's called the Macbeth effect, the unconscious impulse to cleanse our sins. Even your internal state matters. A famous study of Israeli parole judges revealed a shocking pattern. Prisoners appearing before judges early morning or right after lunch were granted parole about 65% of the time. But as hours passed and judges grew hungry and tired, the parole rate plummeted towards zero. The judges weren't consciously choosing harsher judgments. Their glucose-depleted brains simply defaulted to the easier path, saying no. Justice apparently depends on well-timed meals. These are the hidden forces operating moments before we act. We're far less rational and in control than we imagine. Hours to days before, zooming further out to the scale of hours and days before the behavior, we encounter hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers traveling through your bloodstream, gradually adjusting your brain's sensitivity. They don't cause behaviors, they adjust the volume, making your brain more or less likely to respond to triggers in particular ways. Let's discuss the most infamous, testosterone. The stereotype says testosterone equals aggression. More testosterone, more aggression. Simple, right? Sapolsky brilliantly dismantles this myth. One of the book's most crucial lessons. Testosterone doesn't create aggression. It amplifies aggression that's already present. Imagine the amygdala as an aggression gas pedal. Testosterone doesn't push the pedal. It makes the pedal more responsive. Testosterone's real function isn't about aggression at all. It's about status. When an animal's status gets challenged, testosterone rises. And what does the animal do? Whatever maintains its status in that specific social context. If you're a baboon, maintaining status typically involves aggression. So testosterone surges make you more aggressive. But what about humans? In a brilliant experiment, men received testosterone doses, then played a bargaining game called the ultimatum game. In this game, you build a reputation for either fairness or selfishness. The stunning result? Men with extra testosterone became more generous, not less. Why? Because in that social context, fairness was the path to status. Testosterone didn't drive aggression, It drove whatever behavior earned respect and elevated standing. As Sapolsky puts it, the problem isn't that testosterone can increase aggression. The problem is how frequently our society rewards aggression with status. Now consider the flip side, oxytocin. Often labeled the cuddle hormone or love hormone. It's released during bonding between mothers and babies, between romantic partners. It promotes trust, generosity, and empathy. Sounds wonderful, right? But oxytocin has a shadow side. It doesn't make us love everyone, it makes us love us. And it makes us less cooperative, less trusting, and more hostile toward them. It's a hormone for tribalism, not universal compassion. Studies show oxytocin makes people more likely to favor their own group and even preemptively attack outgroups in competitive games. It draws the line between us and them in thick hormonal marker. Finally, there are stress hormones like cortisol. What does stress do to your brain? Short term, during emergencies, it's life-saving, sharpening focus and mobilizing energy. But chronic stress, lasting hours, days, or weeks, is catastrophic for decision-making. Chronic stress does two things. 1. It sends your amygdala into overdrive, making you more anxious, fearful, and aggressive. 2. It weakens your frontal cortex. Your brain's executive gets exhausted and overwhelmed. The result? Under stress, we become more impulsive. We make worse choices. We default to old habits, even destructive ones. We become less empathetic and more self-focused. A stressed brain is a more primitive brain, where emotional, reactive parts commandeer control. Days to months before zooming out further to days and months, we encounter something remarkable: physical brain changes. This is neuroplasticity. Your brain isn't a fixed, static machine. It constantly rewires itself in response to experience. When you learn something new, connections between neurons, synapses, strengthen. This process is called long-term potentiation. It's like paving a dirt path in your brain into a highway. The more you use a neural pathway, the more efficient it becomes. But the brain also weakens connections through long-term depression. It prunes pathways you don't use. This remodeling happens constantly. The classic example is London taxi drivers. To get licensed, they memorize the knowledge: 25,000 streets and thousands of landmarks. An incredible feat of spatial memory. Brain scans revealed their hippocampus, the spatial memory region, was physically larger than non-taxi drivers. And the longer they'd driven taxis, the bigger it was. Their brains physically adapted to their lifestyle demands. But plasticity cuts both ways. Chronic stress doesn't just impair frontal cortex function. It can physically shrink it. The dendritic branches neurons use to communicate retract. Meanwhile, the amygdala does the opposite, growing larger and more densely connected, becoming even more reactive to threats. This is trauma's biological scar. It explains why experiences from months ago still shape your reactions today. But it's also profoundly hopeful. If brains can change for worse, they can change for better. Neuroplasticity's lesson is that change is always possible. Adolescence. Let's take a special detour into one of life's most turbulent periods, adolescence. Sapolsky nails it perfectly. The teenage brain story is the story of an unfinished frontal cortex. Imagine a car with a souped-up racing engine but faulty brakes. That's the adolescent brain. The emotional, impulsive, reward-seeking parts, the limbic system and dopamine system, are fully developed and running at full throttle. This explains why emotions feel so overwhelming, why social acceptance feels life or death, and why novelty and risk are so intoxicating. An adolescent's dopamine system goes wild for big rewards, but finds small, sensible rewards boring, even repulsive. But the brakes, the rational, forward-thinking frontal cortex, are still under construction. The brain undergoes massive pruning, eliminating inefficient connections, while adding myelin, the insulation-speeding signal transmission. This process doesn't complete until the mid-20s. This gap, mature emotional system, immature rational system, explains almost everything about teenage behavior. The risk-taking, the impulsivity, the extreme sensitivity to peer pressure. In one experiment, adolescents and adults played a simulated driving game. Playing alone, they took similar risks. But when two friends watched, adults, behavior stayed consistent. The adolescents? They took 3 times as many risks. Peer presence amplifies the brain's reward circuitry, making the thrill of showing off irresistible to a brain with weak brakes. This is also when we're most likely to kill or be killed, commit crimes or change the world. It's a period of maximum risk and maximum opportunity, all because the frontal cortex hasn't caught up. Sapolsky argues this delay is actually evolutionarily advantageous. It makes the frontal cortex, the part most uniquely us, less constrained by genes and more sculpted by experience and culture. It's the brain's way of ensuring adaptability. Childhood and the womb. Zooming out further, we reach childhood and fetal life. Your childhood environment didn't just teach you things, it physically constructed your brain. We now know this environment begins in the womb. A fetus can hear, taste, and even learn. Newborns prefer their mother's voice and even recognize rhythms from stories she read during the last trimester. More profoundly, fetal hormone exposure has lifelong organizational effects. Prenatal testosterone exposure, for instance, helps masculinize the brain, influencing everything from childhood playstyles to adult aggression. But the most powerful environmental factor is stress. A mother's stress becomes fetal stress. High maternal stress hormone levels cross the placenta and alter fetal brain construction, creating adults more prone to anxiety and depression. After birth, maternal presence becomes paramount. We know this intuitively, but psychology didn't always. Sapolsky recounts Harry Harlow's devastating monkey experiments from the 1950s. Prevailing wisdom claimed babies only bonded with mothers for food. Harlow built 2 surrogate mothers, one cold wire frame with a milk bottle, another wrapped in soft terry cloth without milk. Baby monkeys overwhelmingly chose the soft, comforting cloth mother, clinging to it for security, only dashing to the wire mother for quick meals. Harlow proved infants need comfort, contact, and love, not just calories. Childhood adversity, poverty, abuse, neglect, leaves deep biological scars. It elevates stress hormones, impairs hippocampus development affecting learning and memory, and most critically, stunts frontal cortex growth. By age 5, children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds average thinner frontal cortices and poorer executive function. They start life's race from behind, their brains already reflecting chronic environmental stress. This isn't psychological, it's neurobiological. Centuries to millennia before. But even childhood gets shaped by deeper forces. For this, we zoom out to centuries and millennia, to culture. Culture, Sapolsky demonstrates, isn't just beliefs or customs. It literally shapes how our brains wire and how we perceive reality. He focuses on one heavily studied cultural divide: individualist versus collectivist cultures. Individualist cultures, like the United States, value independence, personal achievement, and uniqueness. Collectivist cultures, like many East Asian societies, value harmony, interdependence, and group needs. This isn't just philosophical, it changes thinking patterns. Show someone from an individualist culture a picture of fish schooling with one fish ahead, and they see a leader. Show someone from a collectivist culture the same image, and they see an outcast. In experiments, when asked to draw their social networks, Americans typically draw themselves as the largest circle in the center. East Asians draw themselves smaller, off to the side. Where do these differences originate? Sapolsky points to ecology. East Asian collectivism has roots in millennia of rice farming. Growing rice requires massive, coordinated communal labor, building irrigation systems, planting and harvesting together. This fosters interdependence culture. Conversely, American rugged individualism stems from its history as an immigrant nation, people restless and nonconforming enough to leave their homes, and a moving frontier rewarding self-reliance. Culture is the water we swim in, so pervasive we don't notice it, but it shapes our deepest assumptions about right and wrong, us and them. Millions of years ago, evolution. Finally, we reach the ultimate cause. Evolution. Why do our brains work this way at all? Sapolsky outlines 3 pillars of behavioral evolution. 1. Individual selection. You behave to maximize copies of your own genes passing to the next generation. This explains competition and selfishness. The most brutal example is competitive infanticide, seen in species like langur monkeys. When a new male takes over a group, he'll often kill the previous male's infants. It's horrific, but makes cold evolutionary sense. It returns females to fertility so he can father his own offspring. This isn't behavior for the species' good, it's for his selfish genes. 2. Kin selection. You share genes with relatives, 50% with siblings, 25% with half-siblings, 12.5% with cousins. From a genes perspective, helping relatives reproduce is another way of passing on your genes. Geneticist J.B.S. Haldane famously quipped, "I would lay down my life for 2 brothers or 8 cousins." This explains nepotism, family loyalty, and why we feel special obligations to kin. 3. Reciprocal altruism. This explains cooperation between non-relatives. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. This can work, but it's vulnerable to cheating. The most famous cooperative strategy is tit for tat. Start by cooperating, then do whatever the other player did last move. It's nice, but not a pushover. It's retaliatory, but also forgiving. Humans are a messy blend of all these strategies. We're not classic monogamous pair bonders, nor hyper-competitive tournament species like baboons. We are, as Sapolsky says, profoundly confused. We're mildly polygynous, capable of deep love and casual infidelity. Our social lives are tangled webs of individual ambition, family loyalty, and complex cooperation with strangers. The beauty of Sapolsky's framework shows how these ancient evolutionary pressures still operate within us, interacting with our culture, childhood, hormones, and neurons to produce behavior in that single critical second. After this epic journey through time, from a single neuron firing to millions of years of evolution, what's the big takeaway from Behave? If I had to distill Robert Sapolsky's entire message into one phrase, it's complicated. And paradoxically, that's the most hopeful message possible. If behavior were simple, if there were a single aggression gene or single bad brain part, we might be locked into our fates. But it's not. There's no single cause for any behavior. Everything results from the bubbling, interacting stew of everything that came before. Biology isn't destiny. It's context. The most powerful lesson I take from this book is humility. It challenges the very notion of free will. When you understand the sheer number of hidden forces shaping your actions, subliminal cues, hormonal tides, childhood echoes, deep evolutionary programming, it becomes much harder to congratulate yourself for good deeds, and much harder to condemn others for bad ones. Sapolsky himself argues that truly scientific understanding of behavior should lead us to abandon blame altogether. This doesn't mean releasing dangerous people into society. A car with faulty brakes needs removal from the road, not because it's evil, but because it's dangerous. We can protect society without moralistic condemnation. He challenges us to see people not as good or evil, but as end products of biological and environmental lotteries over which they had zero control. This is radical and profoundly humane. So what can you do with this knowledge? First, practice self-awareness with compassion. Next time you feel intense emotion, anger, envy, prejudice, don't just act on it. Ask, am I tired? Hungry? Stressed? What happened in the last few minutes that might be priming this feeling? Understanding the biological machinery doesn't excuse behavior, but it creates space to choose better responses. Second, change context to change behavior. Want people more generous? Don't just preach generosity. Create situations where fairness confers status. Want to reduce prejudice? Don't just lecture tolerance. Create shared goals, turning them into us. We're incredibly context-sensitive. Change the environment, change the behavior. Finally, never underestimate one person's power or one act's power to change the world. From Mohamed Bouazizi, the Tunisian fruit vendor whose self-immolation sparked the Arab Spring, to Hugh Thompson, the helicopter pilot who landed between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians at My Lai, history overflows with moments where one person's choice changed everything. Our biology makes us who we are, but it doesn't have the final say. Behave isn't an easy book. It's dense, sprawling, and challenges deeply held beliefs. But it's unquestionably one of our time's most important books. It's a synthesis masterpiece, weaving together a dozen scientific fields into one coherent story of what it means to be human. That was a summary of Behave by Robert Sapolsky. We've explored the core ideas today, but a summary is like viewing a map of a beautiful country. It shows major cities and highways, but can't convey the feeling of walking through ancient forests or watching sunsets over oceans. The real magic happens when you read it yourself. This summary is a starting point, a way to decide if this journey calls to you. If anything we've discussed has sparked your curiosity or challenged your thinking, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading Behave isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that fundamentally transforms how you see yourself, other people, and humanity's story. There's a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please subscribe and share it with someone who might appreciate it too. We're building a community dedicated to exploring the world's biggest ideas, one book at a time. Let's keep growing and learning together.